Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Victory Degree podcast. I say that I'm excited for every episode, but I think this one has a bit of a different feel to it, kind of a full circle moment for myself. So I am extremely honored, excited, every single emotion that you can think of to welcome our guest today, Rajeev Ram. Rajeev, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
So I'll do my best to give you a bit of an introduction here. So for those who don't know, Rajiv, you are a legend amongst the uh, tennis world, especially in the doubles game. You've been as high as number one, so that's I think you achieved that in October of last year, hitting the number one mark, which is incredible. You've won 6 titles throughout the span of your career, so that's including doubles and mixed doubles. You and your partner Joe Salisbury, first team to three-peat at the U.S. Open in 109 years, which is, I mean, what an achievement. You born in Denver. I think you currently live in Indiana. When you think back and you look back on your career, like what accomplishment stands out to you? What are you the most proud of?
First of all, thanks for the intro. It's a good question. I think for me, when you start, you always kind of look at the people that have become sort of the best in the game, right? And to say at one point I was number one in the world, at anything, let alone a professional sport, I think it's a pretty cool. I've tangibly hit that mark. So I think I actually didn't really think of it at the time, when that happened, but now that it has, it feels like it's such a long effort and such a tough thing to do. I feel like, and to say that I was at one point the number one player in the world is something I'm incredibly proud of, and I would say that's probably my biggest achievement.
So take us back to young Rajiv, growing up in Denver, Colorado. How did you find tennis? How did you come across it? And what role did your father play in kind of developing that passion that you have for tennis?
Yeah, I mean, I actually I didn't actually live in Denver ever. I was born there and moved about when I was a month. So moved to Northern California and then Wisconsin and then Indiana, which is where I ended up, spending most of my childhood. But yeah, it was something that my dad and I did together. He would come home from work every day, and from the time I can remember, I actually don't remember not playing tennis. I don't remember my first day. So, from the time I can remember, it would just be what we would do. He would come home, and when we lived in California, the weather was nice. We'd go out to the local park. When we lived in Wisconsin, the weather was less nice. So we were fortunate to just have a small little tennis club down the road, a few courts that we would just play every evening, for about an hour or whatever it was. And something that we did together. I love the sport. I love playing. I never ever thought it was going to turn into what it has become. It was just my way of enjoying my time with my dad, and I think he would have said the same. And you know, I think that's one of the reasons I've been able to play and compete so long, is that it's always been a source of enjoyment and not really a stress.
I saw an interview with your father, who I believe unfortunately passed away in 2019. So sorry
Yeah,
for your loss.
thanks.
There's an interview, and I think the question was, what role did your father play in your tennis career early on, and kind of what role does a parent, should a parent play in a young athlete's life? Is the parent there to maybe guide them, right? Are they there to push them to their limit? Like, what should you take more of a laid back approach? So maybe talk a little bit more about the approach that your dad took, and I guess maybe why it worked for you, and then you know, it, what approach are you going to give to your kids? Is it going to be similar to what your dad did for you, or are you going to take on something a little bit different?
I mean, I think, first of all, to answer your first question, what my mom and my dad did for me in terms of my tennis was let me be the driving factor. It was never their decision for me to play. It was always my decision. So if I wanted to play, great. If I wanted to play in high school or in college, great. If I wanted to play as a pro, or if I wanted to give it a shot, great. If I wanted to quit tomorrow, that's okay too. It was always something that, I was going to determine how hard I wanted to work at it, and um, how far I wanted to take it. It was never something that anyone else told me. So I think if I am in the situation of having kids and them being interested in something, it doesn't have to be a sport, right? Whatever it is, I feel like the biggest thing I would want to make sure is that it's always their choice. That way, you can be a guiding force to what and maybe the other thing my parents did really well was surround me with the right people, or do their best to do that. And I think that's the other part of it, right? Is make it the kids' choice as to how much they want to put into it, and then given that, try and put the right people around in place to help them, with whatever it is they're interested in. So those are the two things I would like to say that I would do for my kids, because I think that's the two things that my parents did really well.
At what point in your young tennis career did you realize, or maybe your parents realized, like, wait, this Rajeev guy, there might be something here. We might be onto something. When was there a specific point in time, or was it just kind of throughout the course of your career you developed and eventually just got really good at the sport?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was pretty late in the game compared to a lot of the people that are professionals or whatever now. I was probably about 16 or maybe even 17 years old when I made like a pretty big significant jump. I mean, I was always a good player, and even in terms of nationally and all that, I was one of the better kids. But yeah, I never really thought about the next level so much so. And then in terms of pro, I always thought about college, and that was going to be sort of where it was. But yeah, I got to about 17, and in a 6-month window, I like was all of a sudden beating kids that were significantly better than me 6 months before, and it was just sort of one of those things where I made a huge jump at that time. So it was about then, it was my junior year in high school that, started thinking about, okay, I'm still going to go to college, but maybe I'll think about college as more of like a stepping stone to try to go to the next level, as opposed to, going to college predominantly for school, for academic reasons, let's say.
I think there's an interview out there of you, and you were talking about how early on, especially in your younger years, you didn't really have a coach. And so you would go watch, highlights of other tennis players that you liked, and basically try to copy, their strokes, or some of the things that they were doing. And so is that something that you recommend, or do you think that getting, a coach early on is probably the better path for any young tennis, players out there listening to this?
Well, that's a good question. Oh boy, I think having a coach is probably a more safe path. However, I will say that you got to make sure the coach knows what they're doing, and I think you can see that by the players they've developed in the past, and also by what kind of interest they take in you as a player, or if it's a parent, your child, and I think that's the biggest thing, right? The coach may not know anything at all, but if he really cares, or if she really cares, they're going to try and figure out what's best for the child. And I think any coach that I've ever had really had that for me. I felt like they actually cared about what's best for me, whether they knew anything or not, or had a lot of experience. I don't think that really is the most important thing. So would I recommend doing it the way that I did? Yeah, maybe if it's the right kind of kid and the right player, and they learn better that way, and they seem to really take to that kind of stuff. Sure, I don't think it's wrong. I just don't think it's normal. I think that the majority of the kids would benefit from having some kind of instruction and all that. But I think it's important that the person giving the instruction really cares about what's going on.
When you first got a coach, kind of later on in your teens, is there something that they were able to teach you early on that kind of stuck with you for the rest of your professional career? Was there one defining moment where then maybe they unlocked something and you sat there and you said, wow, if only I knew this sooner?
I don't think there was one necessarily moment. I think one of the things I try to do quite well is just take something positive for everybody, and it's like, whether it's someone who's had a ton of experience, coaching the best players in the world, which I've been lucky enough to be around some of those people, or it's somebody that's, I am very good friends with, and they maybe pick up something on my personality or something that they can help me with, and because they know me so well, so I don't think there's like one defining moment to say, oh yeah, this happened and this was the game changer. I think it's important that you run across a lot of different people, and everyone's got something to offer, and I think the important thing is trying to pick all of those tidbits of knowledge that you can.
I mean, that's fantastic advice, just for life, not even just tennis, but, anything you do. And I love that mindset, right? Because I think, oftentimes we try to look at the negative aspects and take away negativity. But I think seeing the value in people and seeing what they can all bring to the table, I think is extremely important. I love that you brought that up. So you're in college, you at one point are like, maybe I'll give this professional thing a shot. You
Yeah.
come on tour. You're doing singles, and you're doing doubles. You dropped singles 2017 at Newport Beach. I believe that was your last singles match. What was that decision, and what kind of influenced you to say, maybe I'll just focus on doubles for the rest of my career?
It was a pretty easy decision because my body was kind of telling me that was what was going to happen. I felt like at the end of 2016 or in 2016, I actually had a great year. I got to, I think, my career high in 2016 in singles, and did pretty well in doubles as well. And so I ended up playing close to 100 matches. I don't remember the exact number, but somewhere around there of both, and put it together. And I was like, I got to the end of it. I remember this feeling very well, that like I didn't want to pick up a racket. I didn't want to train after that. Like I was spent, after that year was over. And so I thought to myself, I'm like, I could probably do this for one more year. And then if I had this kind of year again, that'd probably be the end of my career. And I didn't really want to stop at that point because, at some point I always knew I wanted to play just doubles and see what that was like, because I had not tried that at that point until that point. And so I thought, that next year I would still play singles, but I would really focus on the other side of it and see sort of how far it got me. And yeah, I played half the year and, played through the summer until Newport, which is a tournament that I won a couple times in singles. And it actually ended up working out really well that was the last match I played competitively in singles, was at a place where it was quite special to me. So it wasn't a very difficult decision, if I'm honest. Like it was that I was kind of sad and sentimental that I wasn't going to play singles anymore, but it was staring me right in the face.
And I think you beat Dimitrov in 2016 in Delray Beach. So, you were kind of ending on a strong note in terms of your singles career.
Yeah.
Like you mentioned, you were, I don't know if you know this or not, but I randomly stumbled upon this digging through the internet archives, but somebody called you Brown Sampras.
I've heard the comparisons. As I said, that's sort of how I learned the game. I've heard a lot of those comparisons, and I welcome any of them, because obviously if you compare it to someone like Pete, is pretty, humbling, I guess. I wish I was a little bit more like him in terms of ability, but hey, you can't have everything. But, yeah, I learned the game by watching players play. My dad wasn't really a tennis aficionado. He could play okay, he could play well enough to hit with me, but wasn't a coach by any stretch of the imagination, never claimed to be. And, I grew up in the US at a time when there's an incredible generation of American male players. Sampras, Agassi, Courier Chang, Todd Martin, Mal Washington, the list goes on and on and on, right? And yeah, I just loved the way Pete played. I thought he had a great, temperament. He was an incredible tennis player, obviously. He was a great competitor, and it just sort of felt like a lot of the things in the personality, at least, that he showed on court were things that spoke to me. So, thought I could maybe try and emulate it to the best of my abilities, because I said that's how I sort of learned to play the game, was watching players that I admired play.
I guess on that note, if people were to think of you, Rajeev, the tennis player, what are some of the things that you'd like for them to think, or some of the lasting impressions that you'd like to leave on them? Just any fan of yours.
I would like to think that someone would always, first of all, think that I played the game with respect. But the second thing in terms of my own tennis was that I always just tried to improve. I tried to get better. That when you saw me from one day to the next, you would say, "Oh, that actually looks like he worked on that." Or, maybe, I was always pushing myself, not in terms of like, "Oh, let me go until I can't go anymore," but pushing myself to try and, "Oh, let me see if I can improve that a little bit, or maybe I can get a little bit better at this, or maybe just something to where I wasn't stagnant." I was always trying to push myself a little bit forward. And always sort of looking for that sort of edge, because I feel like that's the enjoyable part for me, is seeing what you can do, seeing how you can improve a little bit each day. And more than the winning and the losing, I feel like that's the thing that sort of keeps me motivated.
So you've talked about two things that I kind of took a mental note of. One of them was, we discussed briefly, but being able to see the positive attributes in everyone. You just now talked about the mindset of improving every single day. Kind of that 1% improvement. It's like that graph. It's like 1% improvement every single day is like 37 times better over the course of a year.
Right.
Um, where where did you learn, I guess, this way of thinking? And just it seems common, amongst athletes. Well, let's stick with tennis now, but it just seems common that athletes always have this self-improvement mindset and just wanting to be better, wanting, striving to be the best at what they do. Was that something that you think you naturally were just born with, kind of having this mindset, or was it something that maybe your parents, taught you? Did it come from some of the players that you were watching? Like, take me a little bit down that journey of how you came up with the mindset that you currently have and have had in the past.
Yeah, it's probably a little bit everything. First of all, I think there's definitely like a passion for the game. Like that's the first thing. So if we're talking about tennis specifically, I mean, if you don't love the game, it's quite tough to just go out every day and
Hmm.
work on one little thing and do it until you get it absolutely right, or maybe even, as they say, you can't get it wrong, that kind of thing. If you have that kind of mindset. So the first thing is the love of the game. I think that comes first. But I think me loving tennis was something very much to do with my parents, because, as I said, it started out as a something that I really looked forward to doing every evening with my dad. It was something that we did together, and I don't really remember like the tennis so much so, but I just remember going to the club, and then when we were done, we're going to book the court for the next day, and like all those little things, like those little times when it was just him and I, or maybe my mom would come along at times too. It wasn't so much I remember the tennis part of it. It was that everything surrounded it that I really enjoyed. So I think it's a little bit of both. That mindset of trying to always get a little bit better. I think I enjoyed it first, and then as I started to get better and better, definitely my parents instilled it in me that however good I get at tennis, like that was going to be the most important thing. It wasn't. I remember having conversations like, it's not about winning matches when you're 12 years old. It's about developing your game, and let's see if you can win them when you're 14 or 16 or 18. Always looking ahead in the future is what's going to be best for the long run, whatever the long run is. I don't even know if that's got a definition to it, but it was never about like, okay, this very moment. It was about how can you 6 months from now, how can you be a little bit better, even if that meant you're not going to win as much right now. So I think that was an attitude that my parents really took, and like I said, what was really important is the people they surrounded me with also had that idea. It wasn't like I was ever around someone that said, no, forget about, tomorrow, let's work on today, and you have to win this match today. I never, ever remember feeling like that.
Um, I was going to ask about motivation, but I think I'll save that for later because I have a couple of longevity questions I want to ask you.
Sure.
Being an older tennis player and still being at the top of your game, I think it's remarkable. And I think even sports, take, NFL, basketball, whatever, we're seeing athletes play for longer and playing at their top, for a much longer period of time. But I kind of want to save those questions for later. Was there ever a moment of doubt in your mind? I'm sure there was, growing up playing tennis, and even kind of your first impressions of getting on tour and seeing the level of competition that surrounded you. Was there ever a level of doubt to say, hey, I don't know if I can, actually do this thing? Because also, I'll add this to that. In tennis, we know, I think it's what, like the bottom 200 players like barely make any amount of money. I know that there's some initiatives to try and correct that. But it is one of those sports that if you're really good, you can make a really good living for yourself and your family. But if you're not, it's kind of more difficult to kind of sustain yourself and all the travel that comes with it. So I guess long-winded way of asking, was there ever a level of doubt in your mind that you can succeed at the highest level?
Absolutely. I think anyone would tell you, if anyone tells you that they never had any doubt, especially when it comes to trying to be a professional athlete, I mean, I think that would be crazy. Like you said, there's so many great players out there, and you can play really well and lose. And, I mean, as a junior, I was obviously, like I said, a pretty good junior, and you kind of get used to winning all the time if you're a decent junior, and then you lose, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 times a year at most, right? And then all of a sudden you go on tour and you lose every week, and it's like you played 20 tournaments or 25 tournaments and you're losing 25 times, without winning 25 matches even. So I think the doubt is just, it's only natural to be there. I think the ways that I overcame it was that sort of the attitude of, okay, how can I, get a little bit better and get a little bit better. And I never felt the pressure that I had to do it. I always felt like if I didn't have that push anymore, forget about if I was winning. As long as I had that push to improve and improve, I would still try, as long as obviously the finances worked out, because that's a big part of it too, as you said. But if it didn't work out, or I stopped having that motivation to try and improve a little bit, then I was okay with that. I was very okay, and I still am okay with the day that I stop having the motivation to try and get a little bit better in the next practice. That's probably going to be the end of my tennis playing career, and I'm very fine with that, because I don't want to play if I just am kind of making up the numbers.
I think you hit on a good point, and it's something that I've been thinking a lot about recently, which is this motivation and where it comes from. And I think for you, being around the game for so long, I guess we'll get to the longevity part that I was referring to earlier. Being around the game for so long, and being as successful as you have been for so long, I look at someone like Djokovic, who is more motivated than he's ever been, and he's been open about that. And he said, "Listen, I'm motivated to beat everyone, and these young guns think that can come up and dethrone me. Like, no, I'm still number one." And so it's incredible to me, coming from him, who's accomplished so much, is setting records, almost monthly at this point. And then I look at someone like you as well, who has accomplished so much, and you're playing into damn near your 40s. It's remarkable. So like, where do you find this motivation to keep going? And then to me, it almost seems like, I mean, we live in a society where it's okay, you've accomplished this, just move on to the next thing, right? Like, what's the next goal? Like, all right, you won 3 US Opens in a row. All right, let's go for 4, right? And it's always the next goal. We're always chasing that next thing. So, two-part question: how do you
Mhm.
keep that motivation for so long? And then how do you take the time to be in the present moment and appreciate what you've accomplished up to this point, and kind of ignore the future for at least a split second?
Yeah. The first part, I think it's all about why you do it in the first place. And I think, like I said, my why has always been, can I get a little bit better? And if I still feel like I can get better, even if I'm not as good at some things, if I still feel like I can get better at some other things, like, that's the motivation. It feels like I can get better at something and I can still compete at the highest level. Like, that's it for me. It's not much more complicated than that. I still feel like there are things I want to get better at from 2023 that, into 2024. So like, it's motivating to try and do that. And it's motivating when you actually feel that. Um, and as much as anyone will tell you, for me, at least at this point, some of the things get tough about tennis, the travel and the time away, and, you miss all that, but the competing, and, the having a chance at the biggest events in the world, it hasn't gotten old yet. So I'm not feeling that way at all. Um, and then the second part of your question, what was the second question again? Sorry.
Just basically, how do you stay in the present moment and
Oh
enjoy
yeah.
your current accomplishments?
How do you enjoy it? Yeah. I mean, I think that's a more tricky one, right? I think, because, as you said, our society is always like, you do something and like, what's next and what's next and what's next. And I think it's super important. I think, to your point, in tennis, let's say, I've been lucky to play in the generation of, on the men's side, the three greatest players, and now I think, in my opinion, the greatest player in Novak. And one thing that they all seem to do in common is they do take their breaks away from the tour. Whether it's, I feel like Roger sort of started that trend, where he would, miss months at a time, or not, maybe not months at a time, but significant amounts of time. And you feel like, not only does that re-energize, but it also gives you that opportunity to say, hey, look, I did this, and this was pretty cool, and sort of be able to take the time to actually enjoy it without worrying about, man, I got to play this next thing this next week or in 2 weeks or whatever it is. I think those guys have all done an amazing job of, especially Roger and Novak have done an amazing job of that. And I think, they're not the greatest by accident. They're the greatest because I think they've pushed it. They've pushed the envelope in so many different ways. And, one of the ways is just what you said, is actually taking the time to enjoy it. Whereas I feel like the players that I grew up watching, it wasn't so much like that. It was like Pete would win Wimbledon, and then 2 weeks later he's playing his first tournament in the US summer circuit. And, then he wins the US Open, and then he's off doing something. It's like, there wasn't there wasn't that sort of attitude. And I feel like, it's just how things evolve, and something to learn from.
I know we're jumping around a little bit, but one thing that came to mind was, you mentioned some of the greats in Novak, Rafa, Roger, the Bryan brothers who you've played against, just an
Yeah.
amazing doubles team. And what always interests me about studying some of the greatest athletes to ever play, not only tennis, any sport, is their level of detail and the level of detail in their preparation, basically everything that they do in life. And I saw that recent Novak interview on 60 Minutes where he's talking about, when I'm sitting down on the changeover, I'm looking up at the big board to see, is my opponent sweating more than usual? How is he drinking his water? What's his demeanor? Does he look nervous? Does he look confident? All of those things. And I just think that's remarkable. And
Mm-hmm.
there seems, like you said, the greatest to ever play seem to do things a little bit differently. And maybe we'll get to some of the things that you've noticed about them, but you specifically, I consider you to be a great tennis player and certainly at the top. Take us through like your level of preparation, take us through some of the detail that you put in your work that maybe most people wouldn't think of.
Yeah. I mean, I think you kind of got to figure out where you separate yourself, like what is it for me in tennis that I can bring to the court every single day that I think is potentially a game changer, something that's a bit of a difference maker. Like, I'm not the best pure athlete out there. Okay, so that's not it. I do feel like I strike the ball pretty well on most occasions, but I feel like that also comes and goes with confidence and, all that. Um, but I feel like one of the things is a little bit to your point there is kind of the clarity of the moment and clarity of the situation, and to see what's going on and to sort of feel momentum and to feel, the shifts and whatnot. And I feel like, I really appreciated when he said that, because I think that I'm talking about Novak when he said that, because I feel like he's taken sort of the mental chess match, if you will, to a whole nother level in tennis. And I think it's something that I'm certainly not to that point, and I don't, hopefully one day it can be like that. But I feel like that's something I feel like is a strength of mine as well, is to sort of, understand, when it is time to push, when it's time to pull back, when it's time to sort of raise the energy in a match, when it's time to sort of be more within yourself, when it's, maybe you understand what I'm feeling, understand what my opponent might be feeling, and all that, to try and kind of, let's say, win the battle in between the points. So I think for me, a big part of being clear in these matches is making sure that, I'm fully mentally recovered, rested, and ready to sort of apply myself as best as I can in any match that I play. And so when we talk about the recovery process and all that, I think there's a physical aspect, and I think there's also a mental aspect of it too, to make sure that you're in the right state of mind to really pay attention to all those things. Because I think those things, when you're talking about the best players in the world going for the biggest titles, those little things make a difference.
So let's stay on the topic of mental strength. It seems to be a topic for this entire episode, but I love it because I think it's fascinating, especially when it comes to tennis, because a big part of the game is your mentality and what goes on inside your head. And so doubles might be a little bit different, but I'll let you speak to this. When it comes to the, I guess the difficulty of remaining focused during a tennis match and remaining positive. Lead us through how difficult that really is. And then, I mean, you've had experience with both singles and doubles. So maybe, compare and contrast maybe what goes on in your head during a singles match and then what goes on in your head during a doubles match. Like, how are those different? And what are you telling yourself over the course of a match?
I think the biggest thing, we'll start with the difference between singles and doubles, is you have a partner, obviously. So I think the
Right.
thoughts are real similar, but there's the in some cases, I would say disadvantage, but if you use it correctly, a big advantage is that you have somebody to sort of share that with, and for them to share it with you. In doubles, in singles, it's like, okay, it's me versus my opponent. And there's a beauty in that, because it's you against him, and you just have to figure it out, and you try to be just a little bit better on the day. But in doubles, it's the two of you versus the two of them. So even if I'm operating at 30%, of our full team's capacity, of my, if my partner can operate at 70, then we're still good. We got 100. So it's like, I feel a big part of the doubles sort of makeup is that your job is also to facilitate an environment that helps your partner operate at the best and highest possible level that he can. And I think it's something that my partner and I have done actually, pretty well, is that we sort of are there for each other in those moments on the court, and we've been able to share those sort of those situations, of feelings, of thoughts in your head that may be distracting in a way. So I think that's a big deal in doubles, that's not really there in singles so much.
How do you deal with negativity, or I guess when negative thoughts appear in your head? Whether, I mean, you might be on a on a streak of missing a couple shots that you normally would hit. How do you deal with that, and how do you keep your confidence level high throughout a match?
I mean, I think the first thing is to realize, I get this question all the time about nerves. It's like, how do you deal with nerves? And it's like, I mean, the first thing that I would say is that we gotta, as a society, almost just think about nerves. It has such a negative connotation, right? It's like, oh, I'm nervous.
Yeah.
This must be awful. It's like, actually, if you weren't nervous, that would be a bigger problem, because that means you don't really care. So I feel like once you can sort of get that nerves is bad idea out of your head and say, oh, I'm nervous. Okay, well, firstly, that's a good thing because I care. Secondly, let's accept the fact that I'm nervous. And maybe then you have certain routines or certain breathing patterns, or some people, look at their strings. Some people go to the towel. Some people, there's all kinds of different individual cues. But if you think, oh my God, I'm nervous, everything is going to go wrong, then I'm pretty sure everything is going to go wrong in that situation, So I think the same situation is true when it comes to, you're missing shots. Like, why does that bother you? It bothers you because you care. Okay, if you kind of turn all of those emotions into, I'm not going to say positive, because I think that's too much, but maybe productive, let's say. They're more productive emotions to actually try and get the ship going in the right direction. I think, that's the best way to come out of it. I don't think it's the greats don't ever, it's not like they don't ever screw up. It's like they just limit the time that they screw up. They're able to turn it around and sort of not have those bad patches last for so long. It's not that they never have bad patches.
Yeah. I mean, I was pretty nervous for my final that I just took last week. So that probably means that I care, which I do, because I need to get a good grade in that class. So that's great. Yeah. I mean, I think it's, as a fan, because we're not in your shoes, again, this is coming from a fan. I imagine someone who's not used to those pressure situations, not, to me, when I watch tennis players, I'm like, wow, Novak is serving in the Australian Open finals. Maybe he's down a break. Like, man, dude, if I was him right now, I'd be real nervous.
Yeah.
You could lose the match and whatever. So it's just tough for fans, because we don't see, I guess, maybe that side to it. And to us, maybe we care so much about our player winning that we almost kind of, I don't know. It's weird. It's a weird relationship, and I can't quite explain. It's like we project our feelings onto them, and then we imagine that we're in their shoes, and we would be, just incredibly nervous in that moment. I don't
Yeah.
know. Probably did a terrible job
I
explaining
agree.
that,
It's
but
so much tougher to watch than to play. I think
right.
it's so much tougher to watch because you don't have any control over what happens. There's nothing you can do to alleviate any of those feelings, right? So you're just watching. And I think anytime you watch, whether it's a tennis match or any other event, where you care about what happens, then it's tougher to watch than to play. Absolutely.
What's been the greatest, speaking of pressure and nerves, what's been the greatest source of pressure for you?
In tennis, I think I've always felt like playing for my country and playing in that scenario, whether it be Davis Cup or the Olympics, or even in college, right? Playing on a team when it's something bigger than you is always been a different source of pressure, or different type of pressure, and to me, it always felt bigger. I felt like those matches meant more, and they just cultivated that environment that was more pressure filled than maybe the ones that are individual. Even if it's doubles, it's still just your team, right? When it's a team event, it's a different situation.
Speaking of playing for your country, you played with Venus Williams, 2016 Summer Olympics. I mean, what was that like? That must have been just a surreal experience.
Yeah, I mean, it was my first Olympics that I got to play. Obviously, Venus and Serena were both on the team, and getting to play with someone like that who was obviously a legend of the game, and such a unique sort of, let's say, unique upbringing, a unique story for a tennis player, two sisters, and the whole bit. Yeah, it was really really cool, and honestly, it was unfortunate. It we lost to Americans in the finals in the gold medal match, but it's probably the one match in my career that I really like would lose the most sleep over, because I feel like I would have loved to have had that one back.
Well, I mean, speaking of some of the greats that we've mentioned before, Venus and Serena are up there. Absolutely, probably two of the greatest to ever play the game on the women's side. And just in general in tennis, their accomplishments incredible. What is there something that you noticed about Venus that maybe you didn't know earlier? Some of her tendencies, or anything that you learned, or maybe picked up on from playing with her?
Yeah, I have a pretty good story about that actually. There was we were playing our first round match, and just to speak to the kind of competitor she is and she was at that point, and she still is. We're playing this match. We're down a set, and it's like even in the second set, and close match. I think we lost the first set in a breaker. You know, not like nothing has happened. Nothing hostile has happened. We're just not winning this match, but it's close. And she looks at me, and like I said, the other two players are incredibly nice people, and nothing else at all. And she looks at me, and she just goes, "Why does that girl hate me over there?" Talking about our opponent. And I was like, "What are you talking about?" And she's like, no, she really hates me. Okay, fine. Maybe there was something I didn't know about, whatever, and then we end up getting through, and we end up winning that match. And afterwards I was like, what happened? Like, what was that all about? And she was like, sometimes, like, when I just feel I'm a little flat and I'm not feeling the competitiveness, I just kind of make it into a personal battle or a mental battle in my own head. And again, like I said, nothing at all changed in the rest of that match in terms of her actions towards the opponent. It's not like she became disrespectful or mean or obnoxious. It was simply to get herself into a more competitive sort of, pumped up state of mind. So because she felt like she was flat. So for me, two things in that. One, the recognition of that feeling, right? So she was turned on, switched on enough, and aware enough in that moment to be like, okay, it's an important match and I'm flat, which happens. And to accept that, not to like judge herself or berate herself, whatever. She accepted that. And then it's like, what are we going to do about it? Well, this is how she's obviously dealt with it in the past. Doesn't mean it's going to work for everyone, or it's the right way to do it, but it's obviously a good way for her to do it. And she was actually able to change the momentum and the feeling that she was having to then play a little bit better. And for me, that was like, oh my gosh, what an eye-opening moment, to like see, like, you know, players don't win matches all the time just because they're the better player. It's a lot of times it's these little things that they can just sort of adjust and figure out ways to turn the momentum a little bit. And you don't win as much as she had without really having a clue as what's going on.
Yeah, I think we've brought him up a lot in this episode, but I think Novak said that about he's experienced a lot of crowds that maybe weren't on his side, and he wasn't the favorite in, and he talks about using that to his advantage and turning that into something that he gets energy off of. He talks about when whenever he'd play Federer and he would hear the crowd chanting Roger, Roger, he would imagine that they're saying Novak, and
Right. Yeah.
and that's what he would do. Did you ever use? I guess we'll call it the Venus tactic. Did you ever use the Venus tactic? Were
Well,
you
I
ever
mean,
playing the Bryan brothers? You're like, dude, I think Mike Bryan is looking at me kind of funny. Like, I don't know.
I, I actually didn't. Let's say I used the first part of the tactic, like when you feel that you're flat and you recognize that that's going on,
Hmm.
to actually accept that that's a real thing. Okay, that's not just like some kind of passing thought or feeling. That's a real thing, and that your energy is directly correlated with your level of play. So for me, it doesn't work when I turn it personal. It doesn't really work so well. I don't really operate in that situation. But if I'm feeling flat, maybe it's a situation where I have a conversation with my box, or in doubles, maybe it's just a matter of voicing it and telling my partner, "Hey, listen, dude, I'm feeling flat right now. Like, let's go." And maybe it's him talking to me or pumping me up or whatever. I don't do it in the same way that Venus does, let's say, or that she did in that match. But I definitely learned a lot about how important that is to recognize, and then to find your own strategy to how to deal with it.
Switching topics just slightly. What's the relationship amongst players on tour? I think it was really eye opening for me when I saw when Roger retired, and you kind of saw the full scope of the friendship between Roger and Rafa. I
Mm-hmm.
think I think we as fans knew that they were close, but they were also competitors. But then you kind of saw the real friendship come out during Roger's retirement. But what just in general? How do players interact with one another on tour, maybe in private, off tour, wherever?
think everyone's different. I think it just like
Hmm.
in, you have let's say you work at a company or you go to school, it's like you're not going to have everyone be the same way. Some people are more to themselves. Some people are very social. Some people have one or two really close friends. And, I don't think there's any certain way that it is. I don't think it's a hostile environment by any stretch, but it is a competitive one. I mean, everyone's out there, this is what we do for a living and super, pressure filled situations and all that. And there's no running away from that. I think it brings out different characteristics of people that they just handle it in certain ways. I'm probably more of the ones that I am friends with everyone and I like everyone, but I'm certainly not too close. I kind of have my own group of people in terms of not fellow competitors, whether it's my coach or my wife or whoever else that I would rather kind of spend my off time with. And, I just operate about it. I go about it in that way, whether that's right or wrong, I don't think it really matters. And some people are real good friends with some of the other players on tour, and that's okay too. That's just not how I do it.
Yeah. What's it been like being a public figure? You're obviously you've accomplished a lot in the sport. Like we mentioned, three-time U.S. Open champion, three-peat. What's it like being a public figure? Are there any cons that people might not realize just being in the public spotlight?
Not really sure I am a public figure, but
Hey man, you have
maybe,
like 14,000 Instagram followers.
maybe in
That's
like
pretty
the
good.
tennis world, in like the very
Yeah.
sort of small tennis world, like if you go to a local club and whatever else. But no, I mean, look, I think I don't mind it. I've never been in a situation where I feel like, oh man, I wish I wasn't.
Mm.
This is really annoying or whatever. I don't think it's to that level. I can only imagine what some of the other people we've talked about this interview have to deal with on a daily basis. But for me, it's just been mostly all appreciation of what I've tried to do with my tennis and people saying that they enjoy watching me play and all that kind of stuff. But nothing much more than that. So I feel fortunate to be in the position that some people might watch me play and think it's fun and entertaining, and I'm going to try to do that as long as I can.
Couple of rapid fire questions, I guess. But the first question that I want to ask is proudest moment in your career, and then also the lowest moment in your career.
Um, Proudest moment, I'm gonna say I got two for you. One is the Monday when I became number one in the world. Just because, like I said, it was something that sometimes you feel like it's so far away and you're never going to get there. And then when it actually finally did happen, it actually was more overwhelming than I even thought it was going to be, because I knew it was going to happen. It's not like it wasn't a surprise. I knew I did the math and I knew what day it was going to happen. And to actually, when it did, I was like, wow, it's still more than I thought. And then the other one was, winning U.S. Open for the third time in a row. Just we set a couple of records doing that. And with U.S. Open obviously being my home slam, I've been there every year since I was, I think, 14 or 15 years old. And so, having won it once was great. Winning it three times in a row was, beyond my imagination. Lowest moments, it's hard to say it's low, but like I said, the one match that I wish I could turn the result on was that mixed doubles match in the Olympics. The Olympics happen once every 4 years. We have 4 Grand Slams a year, so even if you screw up one, you can have one like right around the corner. The Olympics, you don't even know if you're going to get a chance to play another one, which I happen to be lucky enough to play one more. But, how many times are you going to, be in a situation to win a gold medal? If you're lucky, once, and I was in that situation and didn't quite get it. So I feel like it's hard to say winning a silver medal for your country is low, but if I could turn turn a result of a match around, it'd be that one.
Longevity in sports. We touched upon it a little bit earlier, but now let's talk more maybe on the physical side of things.
Mm-hmm.
I would argue that we're almost in a golden age of longevity. I mean, Brady, you look at what LeBron is doing.
Yep.
You look, even take tennis. You look at Roger. You look at Novak. Rafa is making a comeback. It seems like we're experiencing a new level of longevity almost every year.
Yep.
You are another example of that, for playing as long as you have and still being, really good at the sport. And I think you're sixth right now in the world, which is, still incredible. What seems to do it for you, and what has enabled you to play for as long as you have?
I mean, physically, I think like the difference in, the idea of training from when I first started to now is incredible. Like but I
Hmm.
say this all the time. It's like when I first started, it was people were just, okay, run as fast as you can, jump as high as you can, lift as much as you can, like go, go, go until you just like can't anymore. And now it's even the training is so much more intricate, and the ideas of what it is to be fit. It's not really so much about the capacity that you can do, but it's more about the length of time you can do it. And the ideas of training is so much more detailed. Okay, let me work on balance, let me work on firing this one specific muscle for this one specific job. I mean, it's a very different look. And the other thing that's probably been even more revolutionary is the recovery process. Okay, before it was like everything would happen before, and then you'd have like a 10-minute stretch or something afterwards, and that would be that. And now it's like quite often the after training or matches takes longer than the before, because people are doing the ice baths, and they're doing the heat therapy, and then they're doing the stretching and specific stretching and mobility, and then massage. And it's like 4, 5, 6 things that come after each day of training. And I think you're seeing the effects of it. You're seeing Tom Brady play till however long, and LeBron still talking about playing minutes like he would, like he was when he first started. And tennis, we have our long list of people that are doing the same thing. So it's not just in tennis, but it's pretty awesome to see that in all the other sports.
Agreed. And especially as a fan, it's awesome to watch. Again, some of the best athletes on the world go at it for as long as they have. I think I read in Rogers' biography, The Master. Great book. I can't recommend it enough for anyone listening. Fantastic depiction of his life, from the start of his tennis career all the way up until pretty much his retirement. Just fantastic read. But he talks about training a lot, or not he, but the author talks about Rogers' training a lot, especially growing up, and how it was, to your point, it was that go, go, go mentality. And I think he had a fitness coach at one time come in who kind of revolutionized the way that he thought about training, where it was like, okay, let's work on certain muscle groups. Let's strengthen, our core muscles, and do things in a different way. So I think, to your point, I think it's amazing what we've done with sports medicine, and all that. It's great to see. Rajeev, a couple more questions for you. This one hits a little close to home, and I'm sure it's going to hit close to home, literally to you as well. How do we get American tennis back to its glory days? For someone who grew up in the American tennis system, I guess you could call it, is there something that we can change to get, just American tennis back on track, and start seeing some American tennis players hold up Grand Slam trophies?
I think the first thing is we got to change our expectations, because I think when the Americans were winning every couple of majors, like in the 90s, first of all, tennis wasn't the same. It wasn't nearly as global. It wasn't nearly as, attractive for people to play. And we had way more people in terms of, let's say, the whole world playing tennis in America than everywhere else than it is right now. So I think that's the first thing. I don't think it's just going to be so easy. But to your point, I think some of the things that I think, if we sort of change the outlook and the expectations, as a culture, as a country, then I feel like there's a slight bit of entitlement that comes along with just being an American tennis player, and I think that needs to go away, if I'm honest, to try and I don't think you have that from some of the people that are coming up on the men's side right now. They feel like they got to earn their keep every single day. And I think if some of the Americans kind of adopted that attitude a little bit better, then I think you would see the results going more and more the right direction. And I will say, I think it's heading that way. It's heading that way. I feel like the group that has been playing now for a while is doing a much better job of that, and I'm hoping that the next group behind them and the next group behind them after that will sort of continue that upward process. Because I think, to be honest, it's more of an attitude thing than anything else. If there's a difference that I see, it's the difference in attitude between some of the players from other countries as opposed to ours.
What so there's maybe a young American tennis player listening to this, or any young American, any young person, just in general, all over the world, whoever it may be. If you were to list out maybe the most important sacrifice that success requires, what's at the top of your list? Like, what in your mind do you think you have to sacrifice if you want to reach the top of whatever you're pursuing?
Um, I think you touched on detail earlier, but I think it's such an attitude thing. In tennis, I've never lost a match that I deserve to win. Like, you lose the match because you deserve to lose. That's just it. And you win a match because you deserve to win. I think you get a lot of this. Oh, you lost, but you deserve to win because you tried hard. No, no, you don't. You don't just deserve to win because you tried hard. Because I'm pretty sure the other guy was trying hard too. Like, you get what you deserve in this sport. And I feel like if you can adopt that sort of attitude, and it really, if that's your sort of number one way of looking at it, it takes the feeling sorry for yourself out of it. Because I think feeling sorry for yourself comes when you feel like you deserve something and you didn't get it. And in tennis, it never ever works like that. You get what you deserve, and that's it. So if you can kind of adopt that attitude, I feel like it'll serve you well, because you're going to lose matches that you feel like you should have won, but you didn't, and that's the bottom line.
No more participation trophies. Heard it
Yeah,
here first.
exactly.
um, what maybe kind of an odd question, maybe not. What life lessons, kind of staying on topic, has tennis taught you? Um, what is there anything in particular that just has really struck home with you, or something that maybe one day you'd like to pass on to your kids eventually?
Well, I think that, right?
Yeah,
That's
right.
about as significant of a lesson as I've learned from tennis, is that, there's no free lunch. You get what you earn, and that's it. And you got to work for it. And, there's no substitute for it. What does hard work mean? I think that means different things to different people. I think that's for you to decide on your own, but it certainly is not going to be earned by cutting corners, by knowing you should have done something and you didn't do it. Like, that shows up in the worst moments. So I think, you know, that's it for me. I don't think that is only true on the tennis court.
What are your plans after tennis? So I know you have the Rajeev Ram Foundation,
Mhm.
that you started. So maybe quickly explain to us what are your goals with the foundation, and then what do you see yourself doing after tennis?
Yeah. So we started a foundation. I started a foundation about 23. So, man, it's been more than 10 years of having it. But it's just very locally based in Indianapolis, where I'm from. We just try to grow the game in our own way, and that's actually taken on a bunch of different lights. It's been anything from high school tennis scholarships to scholarships, meaning high school players to play in the winter or in the summer when high school tennis isn't offered, to trying to equip high school teams for having a tennis team, which they wouldn't, to helping high level junior players, to actually hosting a professional tournament in 2022. We hosted a challenger event, which was really, really cool. Really enjoyed that part of it more than I actually thought I would. So yeah, when I'm done playing, I would love to be more involved with that. I think, bringing my local tennis community together is something I think is beneficial in a lot of factors, in a lot of ways. Um, so that's one thing. Past that, I don't really know. I'm still pretty into this playing thing, and I think looking too far past it will kind of take away from everything that I need to do to play at the highest level. So this is a big year. It's an Olympic year. It's a super important year for me, and I'm not really thinking too much past that. I think for me, it gets a little too cloudy if I think too far ahead.
I guess might be relevant right now, and we'll end it on two questions here. So the first of the two questions, obviously, there's no tennis right now. This is the break, end of the year break. What do you usually do during the break? Do you have the mentality of, let me try to rest up and kind of recuperate for the next year, or are you practicing every single day? Like, what's your mentality during the break?
I think for me, it's not practicing every single day at this point in my career, because I've played so much tennis, and
Hmm.
I'm obviously, being recovering and letting my body have a chance to rest is a big priority. So that's the first thing. But yeah, I do still feel like improving physically, and really getting some recovery things down for the next year is a super important thing. And also just sort of yeah, getting to give myself a chance to build a base for the next year is a really important part of the off season, right? So that's physical, mental, because it's a long year, and making sure that is priority for me is the biggest thing.
Love it. Rajiv, we end every episode on this next question, and I think I might already know the answer to it, but I'll ask you anyways. So basically, what we do is I ask you one piece of life advice that you'd like to leave for the next guest.
Mm-hmm.
And the fun part is that you don't know who that next guest might be.
Okay.
The guest before you, his name was Jovan Buha. He is a Lakers beat reporter, actually.
Oh,
And
cool.
so, yeah, he's been in the business for a while. Really, really awesome guy. And the advice that he left for you was bet on yourself. You'll never regret it. So
I
to
couldn't
start
agree with
off,
that more, actually. That's an incredibly good piece of advice.
so you beat me to it, but what does that mean to you, and how have you maybe used that in your life?
Yeah, I mean, investing in yourself, basically for me, that means, if you feel like something is going to make you just that little bit better, whether it be for me in this business, right? We have coaches, we have trainers, we have people that can travel with us. And, it's not cheap and it's not easy. And a lot of times, and sometimes you're at that 50-50 mark. You're like, well, I can afford this, but it's sort of stretching a little bit. I will say that for me, there's obviously situations where it's out of your reach. Okay, fine, that's a no. And there's some which are no brainers, which, okay, that's a yes. I'm going to get my racket strong before every match, a small expense like that. Right. But then there's those 50-50 ones, which are like, oh, I could do this, but, maybe a short term mindset would say it would be better for me not to do this. And some people might think you're crazy and all that. But I always feel like every single time I've invested in myself, when it's been one of those 50-50 situations, I've never regretted it. I've always thought, if it's worked out, it's worked out. Or if it hasn't worked out, I've really learned something from it. So that the next thing I do is I at least have a lesson from that previous one.
Amazing. And then the piece of advice that you like to leave for our next guest.
Um, I know I said this already, but I feel like it's the sort of the theme of it. I feel like adopt the attitude of whatever you get, you deserve it in some way,
Hmm.
and that I think is for the good and the bad. I think sometimes we you know do something great and you kind of think it's happened by accident or you've gotten lucky or it's a fluke. I don't think I think that's as important as realizing the bad things aren't a fluke either. If you do something great, there's something that happened along the way that you did right, and you need to make sure you learn from that and try and repeat it as much as possible, whatever that might be, whether it's an attitude or whatever it is, or a way to go about a job or a business or a sport. So I think if you kind of adopt that attitude that you deserve what you get, or you get what you deserve, I think the good and the bad, it can certainly help you progress and keep doing what's good and kind of go away from what's not.
Beautiful, beautiful way to end the podcast. Love that we ended on that note. Rajeev, it has been an absolute honor. This hour has flown by. Can't thank you enough for coming on. People can find you on Instagram, on Twitter. We'll include all your links in the description. Anything else you'd like to shout out?
No, just thanks for having me. It was a ton of fun, and I appreciate you doing this.
Absolutely. So like I said, all of Rajiv's links will be in the description. Rajeev, we can't thank you enough for coming on. And I'm sure we'll talk again real soon.
Okay, you got it. Bye.